welcome to the Mystical Journey. Today we have a wonderful professor, David Shorter. I've had the privilege of meeting him when I was a student at UCLA and took several classes with him. He does so many different things that I'm going to let him introduce himself because I don't want to miss anything. Hi, David.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me on.
Welcome. We're happy to have you.
So I guess the best way to introduce myself is that I am a professor at the University of California, Los Angeles in the Department of World Arts and Cultures. I am the director of a major digital project called the Archive of Healing, which looks at concepts of healing and wellness and what counts as health in the body around the world. It is the largest digitized archive of folkloric sayings about health and wellness in the world. Before that, I was the creator and I'm the director of the Wiki for Indigenous Languages, which is an open source platform for Indigenous communities to develop social media based around language learning of their own Indigenous languages. And I've created ethnographic film and wrote a book and created a website all for a tribe that I worked with for 22, 23 years in Mexico called the UMA people or the UMA tribe. My training is with a PhD in the history of consciousness, though I've got a lot of focus on the history of science and feminist theory. And I would say that I'm very much invested or interested in what counts as knowledge and knowledge making in different cultures and communities. That's kind of the wrap up. Oh, and I'm a Reiki master because I'm not just the president, I'm a member of the sort of groups of people that I'm trying to study, which is a very, you might want to say, anthropological approach or ethnographic approach, which is that I always want to be in conversation with the people I'm allegedly trying to understand. Otherwise, it's just some sort of weird colonial voyeurism.
So one first question is, how did you get to do, first of all, your studies? Because I'm sure the healing part of it, was it already like an interest from the very beginning?
You know, I think that like a lot of people, you come to an understanding of who you are and your memories and how they form you or create who you are, not necessarily as teens or through puberty, but actually a little bit later. So I had started college thinking, I want to be a lawyer for the Vatican because I really care about justice and I really care. I mean, I was a good little Catholic boy. And then like in my first year, I was essentially dating my Italian teacher who told me that the worst things in the world are lawyers in the Vatican. So I stopped being Catholic and I stopped wanting to be a lawyer, but I was super interested in religious studies. I guess I was super interested in that same question that I study today is why is something knowledge in one culture or what counts as truth? And that came from being a child whose father worked for top secret levels of the government on UFO projects. And because he was gone all the time, I was sent to live with my great grandmother, who was a sort of midwife healer. So you can imagine by the time I got to college, I just, you know, like most of us, I sort of thought all of us have parents who work on UFOs and grandparents who are healers. And then I realized when I got to college, that's not the case. That's a pretty weird thing, which of course then led to this process of me realizing, oh, what I thought was real as a kid isn't real, which you can imagine then fosters, well, then what's real? And how do we know what's real? And what counts as real? So I got a degree in religious studies and then a master's in religious studies because I started working with that tribe in Mexico. And then I got my PhD in the history of consciousness program at University of California, Santa Cruz. And in that field work that I was doing with the tribe, they kept putting me in this position of, you might want to say, a curandero or a healer. And I kept on resisting it because, of course, I was the objective anthropologist. I don't know what you're talking about. And they're like, stop it. We can see what you can do. We know that they sort of just asked me to step up to the plate in my own life, you might want to say, that I had to sort of be true to who I was if I was going to work with them in any honest manner. And then that led to me meeting one of the most rare and unique types of healers that they have there. And he essentially said he would work with me and apprentice with me for a period of at least 3 to 4 months, maybe even longer if it went well. And I could watch what he did and I can come to a better understanding of his concept of the universe and energies and the body. And I did that work and it was life-changing, as you can imagine. And then I got back to, you might want to say, the academic life of writing peer-reviewed articles and doing all my teaching. And I myself suffered a physical ailment and it had me going to many doctors, no results, surgeons. They were considering spinal surgery. It was a really serious thing in my life. As anyone who's listening to this knows, when things like this happen, they really can be really tedious on you. They can really weigh you down. I was at my wit's end. I had no idea what to do. So I went to a Reiki healer thinking anything's got to work, right? Like maybe Reiki will help.
Yeah.
And it was the first time in 9 months I hadn't had neck pain that day. And it was really weird, right? I mean, you know how these things are. You're like, well, that's weird. So then I made another appointment. Again, the pain subsided and I didn't have pain for another 2 or 3 days after the second appointment, which then led me to be like, okay, what is this? So I went to a workshop on Reiki the following Saturday. Long story short, 2 years later, I'm studying in Japan with the last living lineage director of the sort of school that created Reiki in Ashia, Japan. And now you might want to say, I'm convinced I drank the Kool-Aid. And so I'm very much looking at this point in my life as being one that no longer has to choose one, an academic side or non-academic side. It's all one. It's all who I am now, which feels perfect. Unfortunately, it feels a little too late. You know, have you ever looked at someone from a younger generation and went, wow, they've got it all figured out in terms of sexuality or desire or something like that? How would it take me 40 years?
Yeah.
But that's the path, right?
But I know we've had these conversations before, but even some of the books that you made us read in class, on different women healers too, and in a lot of the cases, they become healers later in life. So I think, the later, the more knowledge you kind of get also.
I think you're right. I think we have a very perhaps misguided understanding of the phases of life. I think our society wants us to spend 20% of our life training to do one thing for the next 80% of our life. And I never wanted that. Even as a little kid, I would look around at our society and be like, oh my God, I want to do 20 things. I want to be a pastry chef. I want to like be on TV. Like I just wanted to do so many. Why do we have to choose one?
I think we can relate.
And people who study like women's health know, particularly from an indigenous context, know that menopause is a serious your energy shift, your priority shift, but also your knowledge sets in a little bit. Your level of confidence changes. And we don't really have the same analogy for men. I mean, we of course think of the midlife crisis with the sports car and the sports jacket, which I'm totally doing right now. So I get that there's like a midlife thing going on, but it is actually, I try to tell people who are in their 30s or 40s, there's a level of confidence and self-knowledge. It's a little bit of fatigue where you just stop caring what people think because you are who you are. And yeah, I wish that would have happened earlier, but it is what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. This is the path we have to go through.
Yes, I think so. And I think it happens for a reason, particularly in the books that I assigned. You have, for example, this famous Pomo healer, Kashaya Pomo healer, Mabel McKay, who, when she was younger, probably partied a lot. It doesn't say so in the text, but it insinuates that she was partying and gambling and dancing. And I was reading these parts thinking, oh my God, wow, like me, like I've seen some things. I've had some fun. And how do I reconcile the fact that I had all this fun and essentially done, kind of every drug in the book. And yet I'm allegedly supposed to be this person who can help other people. And then you get older and you realize, oh, that's why.
Yeah.
Because it now helps you understand, it helps you
Experience.
viscerally feel. Yeah, exactly. The way that you just did that, it helps you literally when someone walks in your space go, I actually know this energy. Oh,
Yeah.
this person's struggling with this or is currently addicted to this or that sort of thing,
And what I think is also very interesting about, some indigenous healers is that there's a gender fluidity too, that they can be both or just one at a time and pick and choose, isn't there?
Yes, and that's, I think, perhaps something they saw in me, right? I mean, because I had worked in the tribe for 14 or 15 years. When I started working in the community, we're talking about the Yuame people in northern Mexico. I was a devout Buddhist. I was my own person, a very sort of, I would imagine, typical 23-year-old college guy who was sensitive, but never really sort of, I don't know, not a player, not a playboy by any means, definitely not a sort of like, frat boy attitude. And I think they saw me as someone who's really sensitive and caring, which is good. Now, 10 years later, I'm fully clear about who I am with myself, which is that ever since I was a kid, I've been bisexual, and I didn't really understand these categories and these static notions of who we're supposed to sort of say we are. And I go and meet, like I said, this healer who is a man wearing a dress with his long hair in a bun, wearing women's earrings that only women generally wear. And what I learn about his power, which is called Murea, is that this power shows itself in individuals because they could be with both men and women. They can choose which they want, or they can sort of have it all. They can have a wife and a young man living at the house, and or whatever the case may be. And they also, in terms of their actual, you might want to say, comfort level, or their power sort of moves with them breaking cultural norms, because they're so smart and powerful that actually the job requires that they see culture for what it is, which is mostly human made. So I think there was a type of resonance between us too. He saw me for who I was, and I saw him for who he was. And he has helped me better understand that when you see people who don't fit into cultural categories, it's actually a sign of their power and perhaps a type of innate gift that they can really do something really powerful and great for their community, rather than what ends up happening in a lot of Western societies is they get shunned or disciplined.
There's so much judgment.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I've been very fortunate in that I see a lot of people of childbearing age who have kids or who are aunts and uncles. And these days I see a lot more, let's let the kid display who they are themselves, and rather than hammer it into them, you know?
Yeah.
But I think power is very much related to sexuality. I've actually written an academic article about this, about how sexuality is actually better thought of as a power rather than as a category, because power shifts change. It can be kinetic. It can be very explosive, of course. It can be static at times. It can be, you might want to say, fluid. And so we should be really thinking about sexuality in these terms rather than as a category, like I'm gay and that's all I am, and that's all I've ever been, that's all I ever will be. I think most people who've had any experience in the sexual spectrum knows sometimes you don't feel sexual at all, and sometimes you don't want to be sexed in that way, right? So I think that there's a very strong relationship to how we think of sexuality and how we think of power, and also how we think of healing. There was this really important moment in Japan with my teacher, who he said, you know, I know how you do things at the West. You look at people's, you know, chakras at their head, and you have them lay up on a table, and it lasts exactly 50 minutes. And we don't have any of that. And you have to do it in the West because it has to look like a massage, or people would have no idea what they're doing because they don't have a concept of energy. And of course, all the treatments end at the belt, because no way are you allowed to have any touching energetic work or anything below the belt. And I'm listening to this guy, I'm like, oh my God, you're so right about the way it is. We're so afraid of even talking about these ways in which, how are we ever going to have a full conversation about the full human body and all that it entails, and all the ways that it might actually have symptoms or be imbalanced or need care, if we're essentially not talking about anything in the swimsuit area, the way that we're taught from, understandably, the way we're taught about sexual harassment and abuse issues, right?
Yeah, of course.
So I think in some ways, and I think a lot of people from Europe see this, the US and perhaps the ways we call the West is a bit in an arrested development. We have yet to actually grow out a very sort of simplistic notion of what the body is.
Yeah, and how we can heal the body.
Yeah, my guess is that the healer that I was working with, Taldo, he was very much, and this is in Mexico rather than in Japan, he was very much aware of the ways that when people come to them with ailments, those ailments are holistically caused. They are how you're dreaming, what you're eating, who you're sleeping with, whether you're feeling like your circulation is fluid and rapid the way it should be, or is it lethargic and imbalanced? And when do the doctors in the US healthcare ever ask you any of that stuff? My doctor hasn't, my doctor's not going to ask me what I'm dreaming. She barely asks me what I eat. Like, there's such a very pharmaceutical approach and object-oriented approach to health, that you can see why so many people are drawn to or reaching beyond what they're told their insurance will pay for these days.
Yeah. I wonder if it's something that's going to change in the future, if it's bound to change somehow, because I feel that more and more people are aware that there's, another dimension to consider, or other
Right.
dimensions, I should say.
Yes, I don't know. I think that societally we've become more boarded because of not only COVID, but because of right-wing politics, in which we think that we can put separations and partitions between cultures and communities, and we can
Hey, like to-
block immigration. And I think what actually helps all that is travel and communion and entanglement with other human beings, right? So I mean, you're both travelers at your own self, or you've been
yeah.
in multiple cultures yourselves, and the richness that brings to your life and opening your eyes about how we should actually be.
And it's also the curiosity and the joy of
Right,
finding out, like, it's,
right.
you know, and
Yeah,
it's
I'm
not
writing
just
a
like
piece right now on
yeah,
that.
like different cultures, but different ways of, like, if we're talking about healing, viewing it as a holistic uh, 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 system, not just like, okay, it's, because the mind can create something.
Yes,
There can be a blockage in an energy field somewhere that creates,
yes.
that creates, and we had a conversation with a healer the other day, and he said,
Oh,
it's not just, the thing and the kind of relationship you have with the thing coming to you. It's also the thing and what he thinks about you, like the energy.
right,
So it's like it goes both ways. And
right.
it's so hard to wrap your head around it, for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the things that I love healers for. And in that way, they are absolutely synonymous to medical doctors, MDs, therapists. They unfold a little bit of the universe, or they help you better understand the signs. So I had a blood test this morning with an MD, my doctor. He's reading the evidence in front of him in terms of lab results. Well, what counts as evidence varies according to the type of doctor or healer you're going to. A therapist is looking for perhaps psycholinguistic cues that you're giving them about where you're narrating your life, etc. But healers and energetic healers are doing the same thing. They just have a different basis of what counts as evidence. I had this really, I'd never traveled much. I'd always wanted to be a person who traveled, but I didn't come from means. And one time I decided to just, spend some money on it and go to a film festival in Paris where my film was accepted at a film festival. So, I'm in Paris for the first time in my life, really in Europe for the first time in my life, really world traveling for the first time in my life. And I throw my back out and I can't move. And I don't speak French. And so I'm like trying to talk to them about chiropractors, which chiropractic, I guess, is a whole different thing in Paris than it is for
Yeah, we
France than
don't
it is
really
here.
have
Like,
there. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I literally Googled healer because I was desperate. I was in Paris for 4 days and I'm on my back, unable to move on the floor of an Airbnb, completely unable to walk. And I Googled healer and found someone on like yahoo.fr who said, "What's going on?" And I said, "Oh, I can't walk." And he's like, "Well, you need to get to me and you need to wear underwear." And I was like, as if I'm not going to wear under, like, I don't understand what's being happening here. I don't speak French, so I really don't know what I've just signed up for, but it sounds hot. Let's see what this is about. And maybe it's going to help him. No, I'm kidding. But anyway, I go to him. There's nothing in his apartment except literally mats and pillows everywhere. And he's got a fire going and candles everywhere. And it was absolutely non-sexual in the sense that it was, you might want to go there in your head. It was absolutely life-changing. What I felt, what I experienced, the way he worked on things. And then we never even talked. We didn't talk for 2 minutes. I don't speak French. How could we have even talked? At the end, he sort of says in broken English, "You're in a life-changing moment right now. You're seeing the world in a way you've never seen it before. And you're not ready for that. Your body hasn't caught up to where your energy is, which caused you to have this back pain. I need you to walk back home," which is like 13 districts away. "I need you to walk back home slowly, paying attention to every shop, every cafe, all the people that you're seeing." I mean, realize I'd been in Europe for the first time in my life for 24 hours and someone had essentially just read me.
Yeah.
Now, that's a person who's reading the evidence on a way that at that point I couldn't do. I didn't know anything about the energetic body, but it made it so that I literally changed my plane ticket and stayed a whole nother week, because now I could move around, but also I was ready to be someone who could take in cultural differences and be in a whole different environment. I mean, I think what I saw the healer doing in Mexico was very similar. He was helping people read the evidence of their bodies, whether it be indigestion or bad dreams, or he was getting people who were HIV positive or people with cancer flying around the world to go meet him. Because
that's crazy too. Like, it's almost like it's a blessing in disguise that you had that back pain, or, so
right.
that, you met that guy that gave you another vision of what you were experiencing. And, and I find that,
and
yeah.
And also what I could do myself, like also how I needed to push myself to, if I was truly invested in understanding what knowledge making looks like in other cultures or in different worldviews, then I had to push myself. And that all happened before I ever became a Reiki master, before I had neck pain. Like that was a sort of moment. Actually, something else happened, and I'm going to tell you in a way that I've never said publicly. When that back pain started, it was, what is that? The most famous, you would say, tourist area of Paris? The bakeries. Montmartre?
Yeah,
Montmartre.
that's what I felt.
What is it called? Montmartre?
Montmartre.
Le Sacré-Cœur.
Okay. Yes. So I was there. I was right under this old windmill by the, by the old theater.
Le Moulin Rouge.
Le
It
Moulin
was
Rouge.
right. It was up the street from the Moulin Rouge, right?
Yeah.
And I'm staying inside this little tiny flat, and that's where my back goes out. And the first night the back goes out, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this. I just got to Paris and now I can't walk. I can't even accept my award at the film festival. This is so sad. All those sort of real emotions. And I lay down, I get up on the bed and I lay down. I have a dream of my grandmother saying, let me show you your house. Now, I didn't have a house. I lived in an apartment in West LA. I'm never going to be able to afford a house. And she gives me a tour of this house that has a blue room and it smells of lavender. And she says, and you're going to have people come to you here and you're going to work on them. And it was her voice. And I remember the blue room, all that stuff. It didn't make any sense to me. I got back from that trip 3 weeks later. And my mom says, I need to let you know I'm not doing well health-wise. And I'd like to give you your inheritance while I'm still alive in the form of a down payment on a house. And I started looking for a house, and I'm now in a house with the exact blue rooms that I saw in the dream, with lavender, 3 lavender beds in back and a lavender bush up front that hits you when you walk in the door, which I smelled in the dream. Now, tell me that wasn't a very mythical weekend in Paris. For that to happen with the back pain, it was exactly what you just said. You sort of like, you only in hindsight do you look back and go, it wasn't kind of meaningful, it was all meaningful.
Yeah.
When something is mythic and symbolic, it's not just slightly mythic and symbolic, it's totally mythic and symbolic, right?
Yeah, and had you not had this back pain, maybe you would have had this dream, but not take it the same way, which is
right.
Yeah.
Right. But isn't that part of also helping people re-narrate? I mean, this is something that I think they used to say in the theories of shamanism, which is that this was a person who would go to help you better understand the cosmos that you're in, not just the situation of you and your family or something like that, but that you're actually part of a cosmic order, and you need to reposition yourself inside that narrative. And I think that that's one of those things that to this day stands out to me, which is that a person might not understand much about what they're going through at a particular given moment, like a breakup or divorce or miscarriage or car wrecks.
Yeah.
And one of the most important things I think a healer can do is, one, hold space, just literally sit with, just hold space with them. 2, touch, just essentially say, you're not alone, because look, there's another actual warm body touching you, caring for you, holding that space with you and gently supporting you. And then that whole listening and then re-narrating so that it becomes purposeful, so that that person can understand that you thought the car wreck was bad. You could imagine what would happen, which would have even been worse had you actually died in it, but you didn't. And so now here you are. Or the miscarriage is the serious one, which I've actually had a lot to deal with in my life, because my great grandmother who raised me was a midwife, not in a sort of trained in the Western system of being a nurse practitioner or a gynecologist or birthing doctor, but in a very Latina, indigenous form in New Mexico. Even though we weren't indigenous, she worked inside the Mescalero Apache community, so she knew a bit about their ways. And she, I don't know if it's through the dreaming or the power or something, but ever since I was a kid, I sort of knew when people were going to have babies, also when they were going to lose their babies. So my aunts used to run me around all the time, meeting cousins or women in the neighborhood when I was 8 or 9. And then afterwards sitting with me and saying, so what do you think about that baby? And as like an 8-year-old, I'd be like, oh, that baby's not going to come. And they would then tell the community. So I've been I've been sort of inducted into this. One doesn't choose their life at 7 or 8 like that. I was sort of brought into a world where we know differently. And, in academic terms, we say epistemology, but in layman's terms or colloquial terms, we say how really varies by, what you were taught was possible about the world. And unfortunately, our educational system and mostly STEM sciences teach you that the only thing that's real are the material, the objects.
Yeah, no, it's very, I mean, and there's still a disconnect, I think, between academia and all that. I mean, we know that, of course, but I wonder, I mean, even in the elementary, and the secondary just school system, I wonder, and some of the schools are bringing mindfulness in, which I think is maybe a first step to understanding more, to be with yourself.
I think that would be a key step. The most powerful, most promising, I would say, disruption to that object-orientated way of thinking would be something akin to decolonizing education. And I just used a term that's really heavy, and some theorists would say decolonization shouldn't be used in this way. It should only be used when there's literally an exchange of the structure of power back into indigenous hands. So I don't mean it in that way. I mean, we should recognize that the school systems that we're currently perpetuating are standardized. They're driven by a notion that a student at a certain age needs to be at a certain level of competence, generally repeating or obeying what someone in power says, and that counts as education.
Yeah.
And that's really sad. And my guess is that's already all over Europe, but not everywhere.
We've experienced it firsthand. I mean, it's like,
really,
you're almost afraid of that person or that teacher. You can't contradict them because they have the knowledge, they have the power, and they decide.
Yeah.
So
right.
You're just like a little.
Yeah.
You can never get an A because you can't be perfect.
Yeah.
Really.
But I'm thankful to my curiosity, like to try to look for other, not other paths, other knowledges, other wisdoms, or other ways of understanding things besides the academic way that's like, but not everybody has, it takes confidence. I guess it's true. It takes like, okay, I'm in my power and I can, take that from them, but take that from them too, and then get a little bit of that and find out my own way of being, and everybody's unique too. So it's kind of like what might be a true for you might not be true for somebody else, but then there's also universal truth. So it's kind of like,
well, I love the way you said that, because you said take from here and there, because I never want to say that what I'm purporting about, you might want to say non-object oriented science is the only way. I'm not even saying it's the alternative.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be complementary. It needs to be on the table. And the problem is that we've created an education system, particularly inside colonial societies, that have essentially pushed off the table art and play and recess. And so then the only place where you literally have imagination and creativity is in some ways athletics, which is really strange. But you can see why so many really smart kids who are told they're not smart should actually go to athletics or sports, when the reality is they're really smart in issues of ingenuity. But the STEM process of I'm going to tell you what to say and then you say it back to me on a timed test, that doesn't actually allow for creativity. So I'm working on a piece right now about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, in which what I'm doing is I'm looking historically at why they're using the word intelligence the way they are. And so I'm in conversation with a teacher and a friend of mine named Donna Haraway. And we were just talking this week about how dog intelligence was always rated about how well a dog obeyed a master. How is that intelligence? That's not intelligence. The dog who sort of like goes to the dog park and flips over and lets the other dog sniff its butt so that it could just get over that whole power thing and then start playing. That's the smarter dog. That's the dog that figured out how to have joy in its day. You know what I mean? So if we're going to rule out play and creativity, we're not really measuring intelligence. We're measuring obedience.
Yeah.
And that's sad. That's why we have a society that is waiting for a celebrity or a politician to tell them how to think or vote or care.
Yeah, for sure. And you're talking about colonization. I mean, I'm thinking like, France colonized a lot of places in Africa, the islands. And I mean, the people like in Algeria, they had to learn French history as if it was their own. So they had to kind of, completely block out their own history to be able to access like the French and maybe be able to go study in France afterwards.
Right.
I mean,
and some of the people who wrote about that originally are literally the founders of post-colonial theories, like Frantz Fanon, Aimé Césaire, like the people who were talking about Algerian and French colonialism. They sort of laid the groundwork for a lot of what we now consider colonial theory or colonial theories of colonialism. Yeah, I don't know much about how it's like to live in contemporary France about issues of colonialism, but I do know that the plague that is inflicted upon students called education is unfortunately deeming some people at a very early age as somehow unproductive, unworthy, and perhaps pipelining them into a future of simply being, what society casts as a laborer or a prisoner. And I think, even though we started talking about healing and medicine, I think these things are, as you two know very well, they're all very much connected.
Completely. And the humiliation too that goes into the teaching.
Absolutely.
It's all connected because you lose some of your self-power through all these methods.
Well, it goes a little bit with the issues of shame and what we were talking about perhaps as being analogous with sexuality. I mean, you can't really be your full self if you're feeling shame.
Yeah.
And of all the ways society disciplines you and parents, I mean, shame is one of the most, you might want to say, perverse ones. That's what makes Catholicism so troubling to me, is this notion that, hey, you're born, actually you're bad. Wait a minute, I just got born. Yeah, but you're bad. But I didn't do anything, but you're bad. What? This creates this notion of shame from the childhood upwards. I mean, whoa, that takes a lot of, I think, therapeutic work in life. Luckily, I'm seeing a lot of students that I teach, which would, I guess, be 17 to 20. They've already worked through that, or their parents didn't raise them that way. I mean, it's really empowering, but sad to be the age that I am, which is 50, and looking at these younger generations. It's empowering because you see that they don't have those exact same issues in the same way. It's a little sad that my generation did, and I'm sure you feel the same way about growing up.
We're learning, I think, hopefully.
Right.
Yeah, each generation their own thing. But it's true, it's funny because one time my son was in elementary, like 4th or 5th grade, and he comes back home. It was during Easter period, and he says, "Mom, who is the guy that died and was born 3 years later?" And I'm like, "My God, he doesn't know about Jesus." And now he knows because, and I called the school and I said, if you're gonna teach, because it's a mom who came in and taught that, I said, if you're going to teach about one thing, you need to teach about everything.
Sure.
You can't be choosing for them what they're going to attach to.
Well, Coralie, I know you're a parent. Are you also a mom? Do you also have kids?
Yeah.
See, I think that would be so difficult. I just don't know how I wouldn't be at the school all the time telling them how to educate my kids. But I guess at some point you just have to know that school's going to do its thing on them, and you're going to have to compensate at home or make sure that they have the right social network.
They're mostly homeschooled, right?
Well, they're now they are. And thank God that the year we made that decision, it was like the COVID year. So
right. Well, that's the thing about COVID. I mean, COVID's restructuring.
Yeah.
It's restructuring society. what you might have learned through this process is that there are things you definitely need to put on the table for your kids, whether it be meditation or, right eating or whatever it is.
Well, they're exposed to it.
Yeah.
They know about all that.
Yeah.
But
And
anyway.
still there's still a lot of anxiety that still comes through, because for the kids.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you had the tough situation of having an actual teenager, Corley, like that has its own battles, I would imagine, because they resist you and probably think that you're an idiot no matter what you say because they're teenagers. So therefore they got
it was my
the hormones.
That was the teenager and not my daughter.
Right.
That would have
true.
been better.
That's true. I'm much more comfortable with the animals. Like I have dogs and I, have a collection of squirrels that I feed and have named. And, my dream someday is to just have a rescue raccoon farm or something like that, where I just take care of animals. But my point being is that, like, I'm good with animals because I have no idea how I would feel if they actually pushed back through like the hormonal stages of puberty and adolescence. That just sounds the worst. So good luck to both of you on that.
Yeah. Well, do you have a last message that you want to pass on?
I don't have a feeling that this COVID year is going to be as bad as I thought it is. The vaccine push out in the US has really ramped up, particularly in California, and you're starting to feel it. And I'm going to use a very new agey word here, but energetically, you're starting to feel things opening up, but you're also starting to feel, and I guess I would say that it's a great moment because there's just a combination of things. Spring is the season that we're in. I don't follow it, but my astrology friends say that it's just a very fertile time right now, very rich time for the next month or two to start putting your dreams, your schemes, and your plans into action. Yeah. So I would say that as we come out of COVID and for conversations like this with enlightened people like yourselves, I would say, hey, let's all pay attention right now and ask ourselves how we're going to put into motion all those hopes and optimistics we thought over the last 12 months.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yes. Sounds good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Hope
absolutely. Absolutely. If anyone needs to look me up, it's just simply davidshorter.com or they can find me at UCLA.
We'll put it on the underneath the title of the video and everything. Put all your information so people can find you.
Awesome.
And
Thank you.
All right, you're very welcome. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.